Hi guys, got a quick tutorial for you today. So I'm going to have to be doing these spiral staircase technical build-up animations, and I wanted to have a good tool for doing radial and helical animations. So I thought I would build one that would do everything I needed it to do. And being that I heard that Lightwave 2023 just came out, I figured that maybe somebody could try and take this nodal setup and convert it over to the new geometry nodes, because you should be able to do this with geometry nodes instead of instances. So it may be a good project for somebody to try and take on. But I'm just going to show you how this tool works. So I'm just going to load from scene, and I have this base here. I'm just going to hit enter, and you can see it loads the tool in. And then the next thing you do is I'm going to load items by name, and I'm going to pick this rounded cube here, and that'll give us that. So now I'm going to go back to the radial tool, go into the instancer, select the rounded rectangle, and I'm going to put it on timing world. You don't have to, but if you want to have offset animations, which I do have controls set up for, then you want to put it on timing world. So the one thing that was really important was that I wanted the ability to have multiple different versions of these in the scene at the same time, and I also wanted to be able to control them all individually. So I wanted to be able to clone this easily and still be able to manipulate the clones with the controllers here. So I'm just going to show you the features for this. So you can see if I go into the animation tool, this is all done with bones that are in here. So if I go into the bones and I pick end array and hit Y, and I just take the array out to here. And then, so all these controls have different parameters hooked up to the scale, rotation, and, well, just pretty much just the scale and rotations. So now if I go into the first one here and I hit H on the Y scale and the H will control the amount of instances that you get. So you can see, now you'll notice that we're not getting this end instance here, and that could be useful because you may want to do a full circle and you don't want that end instance. But sometimes you do want the end instance. So what you could do for there is just scale it into the negative. So if you grab the first controller, scale it into the negative, you'll see that we do now get that end instance. And the other thing to see is you'll notice that they're all targeting now, but if I go into the second control, the scale on the X will control that. So if I turn this to 2, so between 1 and 2 will fade between no rotation and targeted rotation. So you can see there's with no rotation, there's with targeted rotation. And what else because I needed to do this with spiral staircases, you can see if I drag this up on the T here, it'll make a helical array. And you can see they're targeting on the pitch here, but we can also turn that off as well. That's the Y rotation on this one, or the Y scale. So if I take the Y scale to 2, you'll see we'll no longer target on the pitch. So I'm going to leave it on 1. So the other thing we can do here is that I have this set up so that the rotation on the bank of this first controller here will allow us to bring these out in either direction. And the other thing too, if we go to the scale for this, and if I turn the scale to 2 on the X, now I go back into the rotation, you'll see that on the bank, you'll see now that it doesn't step out, it just kind of, they slide out one at a time. So you would want it, there's different reasons you would want to have it both ways for animating purposes. So that's pretty much all there is to it. And I wanted to make sure that this was all very, what's the word I'm looking for? Easy to clone and to duplicate. And also, I didn't want it to mess up no matter what you did to it. Like, I just wanted it to always work no matter how you rotated it. And there's also some other controls set up for offsetting animation, which I'm not going to show you here, but you'll see at the end of the tutorial how they work. But that's pretty much the gist of it. Now, there is one thing I do want to show because I feel like it's important, and that is, let's add a few more of these. And that is how you can reuse these more than one time. So if I just say File, Save Scene, for now I'm just going to call it Test. So now all we got to do here is say Load Items from Scene, and go to Test, and just hit OK. Oh, and there is one other control that I wanted to show you too, so this will give me a chance to do it. So now if I take this, everything, to move the whole thing, what you want to do is use this master transform. So this is the master transform on the one that I just loaded in. So you can see that now we have another one, and you can just keep doing it. Load items from scene, test, okay. Go to the third one, go to the master transform, and you can see now we have another one. And the cool thing is that all these controls are still relative to the instances, to each instance of the radial array tool. So I thought that's something usually that Lightwave has trouble with. So I had to kind of work around that. But I was able to find a pretty elegant solution for it, which you'll see in the tutorial. So that's that. Now there is, like I said, these master transforms, you can they can all be scaled and rotated. And Shift H. Now there's one other thing I want to show here, and that is, you can see when I scale these, it's not scaling the actual instance, it's just scaling the position of the instances. But you may want to scale the whole thing as one. So what you could do is add this other control. Now this controls the animation offset, which I'm not going to show here, but you'll see at the end of the tutorial, because I just don't want to make this any longer than it needs to be. But if I go to the rotation for that one and I turn it to 360, and then I go back to this scale, now you'll see when I scale that master control, it scales the instances with them as well. And that will scale relative too. So if I take this down, so you can see it'll scale. That's just the pivot point pretty much. So that's all I wanted to show you. So hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is build a rig for this. So I'm just going to add a null, and we're just going to call it Radial Animation Tool. And I'm going to hit OK, and that'll give us a null. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Setup, and I'm going to add a joint, and I'm going to add joint. We're just going to call this Master Transform. And I'm going to hit OK. And that's going to give me a joint there. I'm going to go into the properties. I'm going to make it a little bigger. I'm going to go to 200. And I'm also going to change the color. Make it white. So that gives us that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bone, a regular Z-axis bone here. I'm going to add a bone. And I'm going to call this array underscore start, and okay, and you'll see that'll give me a bone. And I want to make the icon size here 0. So it's just the line. I'm going to go into the scene editor, and I'm going to make that the child of our master transform. So I'll just drag it under. And I'm also going to change the color of it to green. And then what I also want to do is I'm going to Control C that. And it'll create another one. I'm going to make that one red. And I'm going to change the name of this one. And we're going to call that array end. So that'll give us the start and end of our array. I hit OK. And there's one more. We need one more joint. So I'm going to add another joint here. And I'm going to call this array aux controls, because I had needed another control for some of these parameters, because I couldn't fit them all on the. I couldn't fit all the controls I needed on these, so I'm just gonna. I added one more. You'll see as we go what this is for. And I'm hit OK, and you can see that puts it right here. And I want to make that one a different color. We'll make it this orange. Yeah, we'll make it red. So that's pretty much all we need for the rig. Now we got to set it up so that it functions the way that we want it to function. So the first thing we want here is, I'm just going to separate this stuff a little bit so you can see what's going on. I'm going to take this start array and I'm going to drag it up here. And I'm going to go into this end array, and I'm going to go into the motion options here. And for the target item, I'm going to put it on start array. And you can see it draws the line and targets it, but I only want the line. I don't want any of the targeting, so I'm just going to turn this back to keyframes. So you can see now that just leaves us the line. And it's not necessary, but I feel like it makes it a little easier when viewing and animating these type of helical and radial arrays, to be able to see the center line. So that's the only reason I'm doing that. Now the other thing I want to do here is for this end array, I always want that scale, the Z scale of this, to match the Z scale of the start array. So the start array is going to control the radius of our radial array. So I'm going to, for the end array, I'm going to go to the scale items, and I'm going to click start array, and then for the Z here, the Z controller, I'm just going to say same as item. So now what you'll see is that if I scale this, that the Z goes with it. The Z on the second control goes with it. The end control stays the same. And this is just all to keep everything visually pleasing while you're working with it, because it just makes it all a little bit better, in my opinion, to do this. So now there's only one other control we have to set up here, and that is that what I want to do here is this guy here. I want that to just stick to the end of this first controller, the start array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the position constraints. I'm going to select start array start, and then I'm just going to do same as item, same as item, same as item. And that needs to be in world coordinates, because you'll see why. Because if I take you'll see if I take this master controller here and move it, it doesn't go. And the reason why is because I have it outside of that hierarchy. You can see here that's sitting here. Had it been underneath, it would work, but I don't want to do it that way. It doesn't really matter either way. So all I gotta do is, if I hit world and now move it, oh, it's the wrong object. So if I go in here and I hit world and then I now move it, you'll see that it follows as expected. So that's all we need for the rig for this. to to control all the different parameters that we're going to set up. So you can see now these two can all move. And then this can move. And rotate. So that's what we want. So that's all there is for the rig. Okay, so I'm just going to use the object that I'm going to clone here. I'm going to load it. Load items by name. I'm going to use this rounded cube. Okay, so that gives me that. I'm going to go back into my radial animation tool, go to the bones, go to the start array. I'm going to make the scale at 10 meters for now. Oh. Scale on the Z at 10 meters. So that gives us that. And now I'm going to go to the end array, and I'm just going to rotate that around this way until I get to about right there, just so we can see when we set this up if it's working or not. And next thing we got to do is just go into the properties, go into the instancer, DP instance, shaded solid, load our cube. I want it on timing world, grouped, pivot, and I'm just going to put the max instances at 1,000. So that's that. That can be upped whenever if you need more, but that's all I'll need for setting this up. And let's go into the nodes. So let's just get our controls, the bones. So we'll get DP kit, item info, bone info. Need 2 of them to start with. And so I'm going to use constant integer for now. I'm going to select this item with this integer, but when I'm done I'm going to pull this, and it'll just be set to self. But the problem is when it's set to self, this doesn't work. The input spy doesn't work, and I may want to use that while I'm setting this up. So just while I'm setting it up, I'm going to control this item with this integer, but then when I'm done I'm going to delete it. And that makes this real easy for reusability and having multiple clones in the scene at one time. I'm going to copy that, and I'm also going to control the bone here with it. So I know that's bone number 2 that I want. That's the start array, and I'm going to control C, control V. And I know this one's bone 3. And the way you get the numbers for these is if you go into the scene editor and you go to sequence and you turn your hierarchy off, you can see that the radial animation tool is the first one. So that's why I have this set to 1. And then if you open that up, the bones are in order. So that's 1, 2, 3. And I need 2 and 3 right now. So that's why that's 2 and 3. So that's that. So we're going to need True Art Node Libraries, Tools, Split Vector. Going to need a couple of these. So we're going to need the rotation and the scale. The rotation and the scale. And so the first thing we have to consider is that if you look at this start array, you'll notice that light waves rotations start from here, pointing down the Z, and they go positive to the right and negative to the left. And that's a problem because the unit circle starts from here and goes the opposite direction. So we have to do a conversion so that this all works out properly. So it's just reversed and off by 90 degrees. So if I get an AS Tools constant pi, that'll become important throughout this. And we're going to need math, scalar multiply. and a math scalar add, and we want to multiply by -1. And so if we take our x into here, and then we add pi divided by 2, that'll make our rotations line up with how the unit circle, the rotation on the unit circle. So I'm just going to copy them, go into here, add 2 pi. So now you can see, like you'll notice this end one here is, this will be, if I click on this and go in here, it'll be 2 pi pretty much, because it's one full rotation. So you'll see if I go all the way back around this way, you'll see that that's now at 0 or close, real close. See? And now when I go around this way, you'll see I'm at 2 pi, and that's exactly how we want this. So the next thing we need, we're going to need a DP kit, instance generator, instance info, because we're going to need the index, and we're going to math scalar add, and I'm going to add -1. And one thing to be aware of, or at least in this version, this input SPI doesn't work with all the inputs. So just keep that in mind, because like you'll see this is giving me -1, but it's not, because this is actually not giving me the right, it's not giving me the right thing. So just keep that in mind. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get the distance between these two rotations. So if I subtract, and I want it to be positive this way, so I want this to be the positive rotation from the start to the end. So we're going to subtract them like this, and you can see that'll give me the rotation, the difference in between the rotations. And what we want to do here is, let's get some sine and cosine, just so we could start setting this up. Sine, cosine, math scalar multiply, tools make vector, and we'll go into the position with that. So, and then what we want to do is we want to multiply that sine and cosine by the radius, which is the scale on the z. So that's right here, which is 10 right now. Okay, so the next thing we have to figure out is the angle. And so the way we got to do this is I'm going to control the amount of instances that we have with the y scale of this first or the start control. So I'm going to put it on, I'm going to go to the y scale, I'm going to put it on 30 for now. So that'll just give us enough instances to work with. So what we can do here is we get a math scalar logic, and we take our, so I'm going to get an AS Tools math, let's see, where's it at? Function round, just to ensure we're getting a whole number here. So I'm going to take the y on the scale here for the first controller. I'm going to round that, just so it's always giving us a whole number. And then I'm going to go into B here, and then I'm going to take the index into A. And then I'm going to say if A is less than B, it'll be 1 and then 0. And then if I go into the enable state here, you can see it'll give us 30 instances. So that's how we're going to control how many instances or how many different objects are in the array. So now we're at 30. So what we got to do here is we got to get the angle in between each. So the way we can do that is we can get a math scalar divide. And what we can do is we could take this difference here and we could divide it by this rounded amount. And you can see that'll give us the in-between for each instance, pretty much. That'll give us theta for each instance. How much do we have to step by? And then what we can do is just math scalar add, or not add, multiply. So if we take this and we multiply it by our index here, and then we go into cosine and sine, and then we go into the x and the z, you'll see that'll give us this. Now you'll notice they're not offset properly, because remember, this is the start here and we didn't take into account for that. So what we have to do is we just have to add to that start there. So we go math scalar add, we go into here, now if we just add this starting rotation to it, you'll see that we get the correct thing. And you can notice now if we can rotate this, we can scale it on the Y to add more or less. So that's all. I guess I should deal with the rotation real quick just to get that started. I'm going to clone this. Whoops. Control C, Control V. We'll go into the rotation. And remember, we got to convert back to, so we're going to have to take this here and multiply by -1. Now you'll notice if we go into the Y or the X rotation here, you'll see that we'll get it'll target them properly. Now I'll put in controls to turn that on and off, because there is cases where you may not want it targeted, and there's cases where you do want it targeted. But for now, I'm just going to leave it on there. So that's that. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is you can see that we don't have this, there's no end instance on this one here. And that's fine if you want to do a full circle. So you do want it to at least have an option to not put that end instance on there. But there is times where you definitely want to be able to put that end instance on there. So let's just handle that real quick. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to get a math scalar absolute. And I'm going to take the round into that, and I'm going to use that to go in here, just so that we're always getting a positive number there. And what else I want to do is I'm going to get a logic here. Logic. And what I want to do is I want to say if the Y scale here, which is what is controlling the is less than 0, then what I want to do is I want to take this, if it is less than 0, or well, let's say if it's not less than 0, which is where we're at now, we're in the positive. So if it's false, I want it to be this, or this number right here, which is 41, which is the scale. But what happens is now what I want to do is I want to subtract 1 from that, and I want to put that into the true if it is less than 0. And what that's going to allow us to do is use the scale in the negative to be able to use to have the end. You'll see here. So I'm in the positive now. You could say I don't have the end one. If I scale into the negative, nope, nothing happened. I must have the wrong controller hooked up. Oh, I was on the wrong. If I select the right one here, so you can see if I go into the negative, well, something. Oh, I never plugged it in. So if I take this and I go into here, you can see if I scale it into the negative, now I get that end one. If I scale it into positive, I don't get the end one. And that's important because you do want that end one at certain times. Like if you're doing a circle, you definitely want it in there. Let me tidy these up a little bit just to keep it somewhat neat while we're going through this. So what all that really did is we're just changing what we're dividing by. We're subtracting 1 from what we were dividing by, the total number of instances. So we're dividing by 1 less than the total number of instances. And that causes us to be able to get that last instance on there like that. That's all that's doing. But I want to keep this neat because this does go a little bit deep. And I just want it to be somewhat easy to follow along with. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at there, and then I'm going to start with the animation on the next part of this. Okay, so we're going to deal with this animation, and so we're going to need another add here, and we're going to go into there, and we'll just rehook these up. And what we're going to add here is we're going to use our control, and I'm going to use the Z rotation for the first controller. So if I go into that, now that that's hooked up, if I go into the start control here, and I go into the Y, I'm going to kill the pitch on this because we're not going to use that. But you can see now I can rotate around, but it's not clamped. So we want that to clamp at the beginning and the end of each one. So the way we can do that is by using the clamp node. So if we take this, we get a math scalar clamp. We go into the clamp and then go into there, there, and there. Now it's messed up because we're not clamping it by anything, but what we want to clamp it by is we're going to get a math scalar add, and we're going to take this, our first starting position of our start control there, and we're going to add that to the difference between the two. And we also need to take into account one more thing here. We need to get math, scalar subtract, and we also need to subtract this the step amount for each one, which is this divided amount here. So now you'll see if I go into the high with this, it'll come back to life. And we need for the low, with the low, we just want this right here, which is our starting position. So now you can see, if we rotate these, now there's a few problems that we got to work out. And one of those problems is you'll now notice that if I rotate this back over itself, it breaks. So we just need to switch those amounts. And there's one other problem too. And I went through a lot of trouble to make sure that this wouldn't ever mess up. So like I wanted to be able to drag these however I wanted and not have to worry about it messing up. So it did cause a little more work to do, but I think it's worth it. And so there's one other thing we have to consider as well, and that's that's when there's not an end one. So there's no end one now. So if I'm going to go into drag this down, and you'll see that it's still missing the end one, even though it's supposed to be there. And that's because we need to take into account for that. So we're going to need a logic here. Logic. And what we're going to say is that if this abs amount here, or we'll use this one, because we want to know if it's positive or negative. That's why I'm not taking it from the abs. So we'll say if A is greater than B. So what we want to do is that if A is greater than B, if it's true, I want it to be this. And if it's false, I want it to be this. And then this can go into the high here. And this should bring back that last instance. These are probably switched. That's why it didn't work. Okay, so now we're good. So now, when I rotate it from here, you'll see it clamps it where it's supposed to. You see it clamps it where it's supposed to. And if I scale this back up so that it's the other way, and we rotate it again, you'll see it still clamps it where it's supposed to. Clamps it where it's supposed to. Now we still have one other problem, this problem here. And the way we can deal with that is, it's not really that big of a deal. We just have to switch these inputs here based on a trigger. So I'm going to get a AS Tools Math or Logic, Logic Scalar 1. And I'm also going to get a TrueArt node library, tools. Let's see, what do I want? Swap scalar here. And what I want to do is I just want to take this and this. And what I want to do is that if this here is less than 0, or this right here is less than 0, which means I've crossed over the rotations and have done this basically. That would make this less than 0. So if this is less than b, which is 0, now I just need the trigger here, so I don't need anything in here, so I'm just going to go from here into here. So now let's just make sure everything's working here. So now when I cross these over, it should work, which it does. So now that's working as expected. So let's just make sure our animation controls are still working. And let's try scaling it the other way. Make sure that's still working. Okay, so that's that part. Now there is one other thing I want to do here, and that is what I want is I want to be able to, you see how they come out like a snake now, but I also want to be able to step these one at a time, coming in and out, same as it is now, but just stepping them. And I'll show you how we can do that. So we're going to get a TrueArt node library, tools, quantized scalar. We're going to get a math, scalar divide, and I'm going to do 1 and I'm going to divide it by the, we want to divide it by, this is that step angle here, so I'm going to do 1 divided by that, and then that's going to be our steps. I'm going to straighten this up as soon as I'm done this one little part here. And then for the input, I want it to be our control there. So now I'm going to have to set up a logic so we can switch between the two of these, but you can see now how it comes in and out is totally different. So what we need here is we just need a logic to switch between this and this. So we're going to math, scalar logic, and what I'm going to use the control for this, I'm going to use the heading or the X scale. So I'm going to say if the X scale is not equal to B. So if it's not equal to 1, so anything other than 1 will turn it on and off. There's not going to be, I'm not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to animate the transition. You could do that, but I don't ever feel like you would need to do that. You could just, it's not really necessary to be able to animate between the quantized version and the unquantized version, but you could fade between the two if you wanted. Instead of just using this logic, you could use a remap and fade between it, but I don't think it's necessary. So we're on this one here. So we're getting that X scale, and we're going to say we're going to have it be this. We're going to use it as the Z one way, and then false we'll do it to this. And then if we go into here, that should do what I want. So if we go, so you can see now it's quantized. But if I go into the scale here and I take that scale to 2 and go back into the rotation, you can see we get the other way. And I wanted that because there's a whole bunch of different ways I'm going to need to be able to animate things in like a circle, like going in and out. So that's why I wanted to have that option. So that's that. So now for the next part of this, you'll notice that what's happening here is that they all just stack up at the very end. And I don't want that. I don't want any stacking at all happening. So we're going to fix that in this next part. Okay, so before I get too much further, let me clean these up a little bit, just so we don't get too crazy. It does get a little bit hard to follow. That's good enough. It's just going to get messy again anyway. We'll clean it up as we go. Okay, so the next thing I want to deal with here is that you'll see, like I said, when we rotate through these, you'll see that they all just stack up on the end and they don't ever disappear completely, which isn't ideal because what about if you don't want there to be one there? Like, you should be able to animate the first one showing up, or the first, you see what I'm saying? Like, you would want to be able to turn that one on and off. And the way we can do this is, what we're going to do is I'm going to use the scale to just scale them to 0. And what it comes down to is you could do it with this enable state, but it's better to use the scale because a scale of 0 on an instance doesn't get rendered at all. Doesn't get calculated. So it's like deleting it without actually deleting the index, which is good because that leaves these indexes alone so that you could do stuff with surfacing, where is if you were to start changing the index with when you're doing this, it would start to mess things up. So I feel like the scale is a better way of dealing with it. So I'm just going to get an AS Tools, Logic, Scalar 2. And what I want to do is I want the input to be our same as we got for the clamp. I want that to be A1 and A2. And what I want here is I want it to be greater than, less than, we'll do less than, greater than. It doesn't really matter. You could change the true and true. I'm going to change it to false and false. And then what he should be able to do here is just go from in the B and in the B here. And if we keep it at 0 and 1, that should give us what we want. So if I go into the scale, what you'll see now is if I scroll through these, you'll notice that they all disappear once they get to the end, this is the way I want it to be. There's a couple other ways you could go about doing it, but this is how I wanted it. And it also works just as well with so if we go this way here, and I also want to change that to 1 just to make sure that the quantization is working. So okay, now here's a good thing. I'm glad that this showed up. You can see that end one flickering there, and that's caused by a floating point error, and we're going to fix that right now. So we're just going to make sure we're on 0. It also shows up when rotating these. See how that one flickers? And that's a floating point error. Now, the way we can fix this is we're going to get a AS Tools constant epsilon. And this is just an infinitesimal. It's the smallest floating point amount before 0. And what I want to do here is I'm just going to get a math scalar add and a math scalar subtract. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these into here. to subtract that from that, and that from that, add it to that, and then just going to replace the ones that we have. So B1, B2, and that should fix our problem. I'm going to check all the different. I think we're good. Put it on 0. Try rotating it. Yeah, I think if they all flash, that's just the OpenGL bug. But I just want to make sure that that first one doesn't ever flip on and off. So that's all good there. So that's all there is for that part. That deals with, and you can see, like I said, that just makes sure that we can bring them in and out, and they'll disappear, so that we can start from 0. Okay, so the next thing we want to set up is the main reason I was building this is because to do spiral staircases, and so in order to do that, we need to be able to turn this into a helical array. So I want to be able to drag this up and have this end follow that end and this end stay at this end. So first thing we have to do is find out the y distance between these two. So that's easy enough to do. If we get a math scalar subtract, and we could just get that by getting we're going to need 2 more of these. Control C, Control V, Control V. One up here, one down here. And what we want to do is we just want to take the y of this and subtract it from the y of this. And that'll give us the distance between here and here. Now, what you would think you could do would be to divide that by the total number of instances and then multiply the index by that amount, but that's not really going to work because of the way that wouldn't really work well for animation. So what we have to do is we have to do the height in relation to theta, that how far around we are on this, and that'll allow us for our animation to work how we want it to work. If we were to just try to multiply by the index, we wouldn't animate very well at all. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to get a db&w remap, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our theta into the input here, and we're just going to use the input 1 for that and that. And what we want to do is we want to go from, we're going to need another one of these switches here, and the bool stays the same, and that for top one can stay at 0, but the bottom one wants to be this distance here, and then they can go into these bottom two. So all that's doing is it's using theta and it's remapping the scale using theta, so that it's everything is being done in relation to the rotation angle and not the index of the instance, because that wouldn't make for good animation. So now all we got to do here is, well, you'll be able to see if I take this into the Y position here, it's not right. So let's try switching this. But before I do that, I do have to do one more thing here, because you'll notice that that only works because the bottom one's at 0. If I take this bottom one here and I move it up, you'll notice that nothing's happening. So I'm just going to leave it there. So what we can do here is we can get a math scalar add. And if we just add this to, let's just do it to this bottom one here, to this bottom controller, to the Y of this bottom. Right here. Oh, no wonder why it's messed up. I messed up here. So I took it from the position here, but this I took from the rotation, so that doesn't belong. This goes into here, and we're going to add to that. So if we go from there into here, that should give us something that we want. So you'll see it's working. It's not, it's reversed. So I'm just going to switch these real quick. Actually, I think I could probably just, I'll just switch them here. So as you can see, it still works. So we can get a helical type of animation now. And I also want to make sure if I rotate these back the other direction that we still working properly. Which we are here. So we're good with that. So I'm going to try dragging this one down, making sure everything's alright. I'm going to put the end one on, make sure that's working. I'm going to make sure this still works. I'm just checking all these controllers, making sure it's working. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is for that part of it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do here is, you can see how right now we're targeting on the heading, we're targeting the center, which is how you want it to be for this type of array. But there may be cases where you also might want to target the pitch as well, so that they're all facing each other on an angle. You'll see what I'm getting at in a minute. And the way we can do this is with the arctangent function. So basically, we just need the lengths of two sides of the triangle that this makes. So we need to get the chord distance between two of these, and we need to get how far it is from the one before it on the height here. So that'll give us the opposite and adjacent sides of the triangle that this makes right here. So what we can do is we can get a math scalar divide. And the first thing we want to do is we want to take this amount and we want to divide that by this amount right here. That's the total number of instances. So that will give us this side of the triangle, the height from here to the center of the previous one. So it'll be this distance. That's what that's going to give us. So that's one side of that triangle. And what we need is the angle theta. So the next thing we need is we need to get the chord distance between these two. And the way we can do that is we can get the way you get the chord distance if you have the angle is we can get a math. We need another divide, Control C, Control V. And what we need to do is we need to divide. So this is our step angle that we're using right here. This is what the step angle, the angle in between each one of these. So what we can do is we can divide that by 2. And we also need to get a math scalar multiply. And we need to get the radius, which is the z scale right here. And then we need to multiply that by 2. Then what we need is we need to get a math trigonometry sine. And we're going to sine that by the theta divided by 2. And then what we do is we multiply these two together. And then what we do is we divide opposite over adjacent. And then what we can do here is if we get the math, trigonometry, arctangent, and we go into here. Now we should just be able to take this right into our Y rotation here. And you can see that that'll target them on the pitch. Now I'm going to set up controls so that we could fade between targeting and untargeting the rotations, because I think that's useful to be able to do. But there is times that you wouldn't want these to be targeted. Like say if you were, like for the spindles on a spiral staircase, they wouldn't get targeted. They would be just without that at all. Be like this. But there is other cases, other things that you definitely would want to be targeted. So I'll set up controls for that in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to leave it like this. Just make sure everything's still working as expected. I just like checking it at every step just to make sure I'm not missing any mistakes. But I think we're good. Okay, so for the next thing we want to do with this is, you'll notice if I go into that master transform and I move it, or rotate it, nothing happens. It moves the controllers, but nothing. It's not globally moving it how we want it. So but we can easily deal with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this controller here, Control C, Control V, and then we'll plug this in for now into the item. And then we want this to be 1 because that was the first joint we created. And if we just drag this all the way over here, I'll straighten these up at the end and so we could get a better look at everything. But if we do it a section at a time, I feel like this is the easiest way to do it. So what we want to do is we just want to transform that with, so if we get a math vector transform to, and we want to be on inverse, and what we want to do here is we want to take our position vector, we go into our vector, and then we want to get the right, up, and forward. And what else we want to do is math vector add. We want to add that to the position of the master control. And then if we go into the position here, nothing, you'll see nothing. It looks like nothing happened. But now when I move that master control, you can see everything works as expected. Now we're not completely done. You can see if I scale it, it scales them. And there's going to be a little more I'm going to do with the scale, but I'll get to that in a second. But the one important thing is that we do have to deal with now is the rotation, because you'll see if I rotate this, you'll notice that the instances don't take into account that rotation there. So what we can do for that is we could just get a math vector HPB add. And if we just add this rotation here to this rotation here and go into the rotation, now you'll see everything works as expected. The rotations work. The scale works. Now you want to scale this uniformly, because you could do it on the Y and uniformly, but there's really no point, because if you want to stretch it on the Y, you could just move these two controls up and down. So I don't think it was really necessary to. I just wanted to be able to scale it uniformly from a pivot point like we're doing here. But I do want to have it so that I'm going to make a switch where that we can have it so that the instances will scale with it as well. See, now we're just scaling those positions, but the instances itself aren't scaling. But I'm going to make and when I set up the rest of these controls, I'll set up a control so that we could switch between both ways. Okay, so there's not too much left to do with this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set up the controls so that I can fade between the rotations on and off and that scale thing that I was talking about. Okay, so let's do the scale thing first, since we were already dealing with that. So, like as you'll see, I'm going to add a few more instances to this. So as you can see now, if I go into that master mover and I scale it, you'll see that it scales the positions like you would expect, but it doesn't scale the actual instances itself. And you may want either or. For animation reasons, you could want to do it either way. But I do want to have that option. So I'm just going to take the scale down to 1 for now. And I guess I'm going to take some of them instances away. That's good. So what we're going to do is we need another control because, and that's going to be the last one for it's getting a bit sloppy, but I'm going to clean it all up at the end. As long as I do it a section at a time, I think you will be able to follow it all right. So what we want here is we're going to need a TrueArt Tools split vector, and I'm going to use the rotation here on the Z, and I'm going to get a DB&W math remap, and so I'm going to go in with the Z here, the Z rotation. So we're just going to control it, we'll use the Z rotation of this fourth control. It's that little red one here. And what we want to do is we want to do it between 0 and pi times 2, so 0 and 360 degrees. And what we want to do is we want to fade from 1 to, what we want to do is we're going to get a math vector length. And I'm just going to take this forward here and get the length of it. That will just make sure that I'm always getting, it's not going to go into the negative. That's why I'm doing that. And that's going to be the out maximum. And then what happens is that just that needs to go into the true for this. So what that's going to cause, if I scale this, if I get that master controller and I hit Shift H, you'll see it doesn't scale the instances, right? But if I come up to this top controller here and I go to the rotation and I put the rotation on 360 degrees, and then I go back to that other one and I scale it, you'll see that now the instances scale with it. And I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted that to be a feature, because there is times where you would want to scale the whole thing uniformly for animation reasons. But the other cool thing too is that you can also, you can fade from one to the other. So like if I go into here and I go to the rotation, you could see I'm going to clamp them values. Clamp values. Clamp values. I'm going to clamp all these values. I should have done that already. So now you can see I can fade between both ways. So I'm just going to put that back to 0. Make sure that's 1. Okay. So that's pretty much all for that part. Now, two other things we need to do here is I'm going to need 2 more remaps, Control C, Control V, Control V. And what I'm going to use these for here is to fade the rotation. So I'm going to use this one, the scaling on the X to control the X rotation, and then the scaling on the Y to control of this. So it's going to be the scaling of this here. I'm going to turn off the Z because we don't need to control that. That's being controlled by the first one. So on the X and the Z, that will fade for our rotations, and you'll see what I'm getting at. So all we're doing here is, and I want to clamp values, that's important. And I want to do the scale between 1 and 2 because I don't want to ever scale it to 0. So go 1 and 2 for each. So the scale between 1 and 2 on each of those, on this controller, will fade between the rotations. So it's getting a bit messy. I'm getting ready to clean this up after this part. So what we want to do here is here's our 2 rotations right here. So what we could do is I'm going to take the X, so I want it to go from, bring the X into here. So when it's at 1, I want it to be targeted, and the Y in here, and then these I want to be at 0. So now if we go into X and Y, you'll see it doesn't seem like anything's changed. Like I said, I'm going to clean this up in a minute so that we could see a little bit easier what's going on here. But that's just controlling those rotations. So now I can go, you'll see if I scale this from say no rotation, full rotation, and then the same thing for this. Now you're seeing it spin like that because it wraps around so many times. That's why it's got so many rotations to do. You could probably just use a switch for that one because there really wouldn't be too many times you'd want to animate that, but I'm going to leave it like that. So I'm just going to leave them on 1 for now, which is both targeting. So now the last thing to set up here are these animation controls. Okay, so the last thing we have to set up with this is the animation offset controls. Meaning that if we animate this base instance, we want to be able to offset it and randomize it and shift the animation per instance on here. And to do that, we already have pretty much everything set up. So I'm going to do this and then I'm going to clean everything up. I'll speed it up when I clean it up. So what we're going to need another one of these, Control C, Control V. And I'm going to use the scaling. So for the offset control here, for the speed, I'm going to use the X scale. And then for the offset, I'm going to get a math scalar add. and a math scalar multiply. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this instance index here. We'll get the one at 0. And what I'm going to do is we're going to multiply that by the y scale. So that's how we can decide how, if we want to offset the animation per instance, this will be the y scale will determine how many frames we want to offset it. So I'm going to multiply by that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that to the z scale. And what that's going to do is that will allow us to shift, because you're going to need to shift the animation in either direction as well. So that's why we're doing that. I'm going to set up a little animation at the end just so you can see. But so then that wants to go in the offset. Well, there's one other thing. We need math scalar, or tools random scalar, and we're going to get a multiply. And we're going to get that instance index again, because this is going to be a random number per instance. I'm going to take it from here because I want it to be from 1 instead of 0. So we're going to get another add. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the X rotation here for from that fourth controller, just to be a multiplier on the seed, so we could change the seed if we don't like the random value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a math scalar sign, not trigonometry sign, scalar sign. This will just change the sign of whatever goes into it. So for the min, for the max, I'm going to do this. And for the min, I'm going to do this sign that. So it's just going to push it back in the same amount in positive and negative. And then we can add that in here. And then we can go into the offset. And that is pretty much the full setup. I'm going to just set up a quick animation just to make sure I did all that right. Okay, just to show you how this works real quick with these offset controllers. If I just take this, the base rectangle or square, and I'm going to move it over here. And then at 20 frames, I'll put it back to 0. I'm just doing something real quick just to show you how you can set something up with these offset controls. So I guess on the first frame, I also want the rotation to be at 180. And what else I want to do here is on the first frame, I want the scale to be at almost 0. You don't want to put it at 0 because I found that can cause errors when the instances are scaled to 0, especially if you're going to be offsetting the animation. I had some issues. So what you do is you just put it at real close to 0. I'm going to put it at 0.01. And then at frame 1, I want it to be at 1. just so they appear from nowhere. And I want to put this on timing world. So you'll already see that it's starting to do the offset already. So now if I just mess with these controllers a bit, which was these here, all the controllers are on the offsetter from that auxiliary one. So if I go to the H and I want the offset in between, I had it at 20 frames, so I figure I'll do this at 6. And then we'll do the speed at 4. And then we'll offset the whole thing at, I don't know, 600. Take these frames to 300. So you can see what that gives you. Now what I do want to do here is I want to do the randomization on that. So if I go into the rotation, the Y, so that would be the pitch rotation. Well, this is the H controls the random seed, so I'll turn that up a bit. And then this I'll turn on, I don't know, 120. So you can see. You can see how they're not totally uniform now. If I jack it up more, you'll be able to see. If I go to 360. But you get the idea. I just wanted to give you an idea of how those controllers worked. And there's really, you could do so many different things. I did have a different animation that I wanted to show, but it would just take too long to set it up. I didn't want to add even more time to this, so that's why I'm just showing you something simple here. But that's pretty much how you can use them controllers to do offset animations. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is we want to reset all these controls just so they're at their base position. And I want to delete the instance object out of there, because we want to have a scene that we could just load this from and not have any of the other stuff with it, but we want it to be all in its base position. And then after I do that, I'll clean up the nodes. So first thing I'm going to do here is just delete that object, the pointer. And then I want to go into the instancer here, and it switches some of this stuff. I want to put this on texture shaded solid. I want to put this on 1000, and I'm going to leave the rest the same. I'm going to hit save. And so now the next thing I want to do here is just zero all this stuff out. So I'm going to go all of these bones here. Again, I'll leave the scale on 10 for them, but for the rotation, I want to put it on 0. Y, I want them to be on 0. Just making sure I don't want to have any random keys anywhere. That's what I'm checking for here. And then for this one here, we got to reset. 1, 1, 1. And the Y be 0, 0. So that's pretty much it. That'll be the base instance, radial instancer there, and then we could just load that from the scene, like I showed you in the beginning, pretty much. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to go into these nodes, and we're going to clean this up real quick. So that's it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to save this file as, I'm just going to call it Radial Animation Tool Base. And then whenever I want to use it, I could just click load from scene and hit enter, and then it'll open this up. Alrighty guys, take care.